Okay, so we're going to start the interview now. I would like to thank you in advance for taking the time to talk to me.
No problem.
So, just to clarify, Landtalk is a citizen science and environmental history project that documents through interviews how local landscapes change over time. It's meant to encourage conversations between generations, and it provides an opportunity to learn about observations you and others have seen.
Okay, that sounds good.
So, I would like to ask you a few questions about the location you've picked, and I would also like to know how long you've lived in the area.
Sure. So, the place that I've picked is a place near where I live called Schofield Town Park. And I've lived here in Stanford for about 23 years now.
Okay. So, what do you remember from when you first moved here?
So, speaking about Schofield Town Park, what I remember when we first moved here was that it had a very small playground. It was, sort of had a small flat hill, and it was kind of overgrown, the whole area. They had an old wooden sign that was in the front, and it led to this small parking lot that had a really awful, kind of terrible looking old industrial building, this small little industrial building. And the parking lot itself was overgrown. It had lots of weeds and grass and things like that. And there was also a larger parking lot on the land with this old salt holding building, this building that held salt, for the roads. It also happened to be a recycling center that I would commonly go to, right, to bring things from the house that needed to be recycled. And they also had this large area behind the parking lot that they used to have these big compost piles so that people could come and get soil from it.
Okay. So, what is your favorite part about living here in Stanford?
Well, my favorite part, especially up here in North Stanford, is that it's really quiet. It's very peaceful, and it's just you're really surrounded by lots of nature. It's a very natural setting, like birds and animals.
All right. Also, what kind of hobbies have you picked up here?
I really enjoy going out for walks and running. I really love gardening around my house, and I used to be a pretty avid cyclist. I used to cycle a lot.
Okay. What animals have you seen here?
Oh, I've seen lots. Animals I've seen around my house and around the park include deer and foxes. I've seen wild turkeys, many different songbirds. I've seen hummingbirds. Of course, we have lots of squirrels and chipmunks. We've had groundhogs, red-tailed hawks. I've seen owls. Let's see what else. Oh yeah, we've seen snakes here. There's been raccoons. Seen skunks. We've had coyotes come through here. Just recently, I saw a salamander. Of course, we get lots of frogs. Let's see what else. I've seen turtles, and just last week I saw a rabbit. So we see rabbits here too.
Okay. And also, what kind of trees and plants are or were here?
Oh, let's see. Well, trees. So I'd say the most common trees around here are oak trees and maple trees. We also have a lot of tulip trees. We have dogwood trees. Of course, lots of pine trees around, and we have some ash trees as well. As far as plants, there's all kinds of plants. Some of them are good and some of them bad. Of course, we have grass. There's a fair amount of poison ivy. We do have mountain laurel around us, which is nice. We have that garlic mustard plant that's around. We have a lot of nice ferns in the forest here around us. Of course, we have dandelions. There's wild violets around in our yard. Lots of clover. We have wild raspberry bushes in our neighborhood around us. There's a fair amount of skunk cabbage in the woods. And there's that oriental bittersweet that is like very viney and it kind of chokes off some of the trees.
Okay. And speaking about the weather, how has it changed over the years?
I would say that over the past few years, we really seem to be getting a lot more rain in the spring and the summer, so it's wetter, and the summers have been cooler. It seems to me. The winters have actually been milder, so we've had less snow than in previous years. Earlier years when we were here, less snow and ice. And I would say that the trees, the foliage on the trees in the autumn, it's just not as bright and vibrant as it used to be. And I think sometimes that's due to more rain, or sometimes it's due to less rain than is usual.
Okay. Have there been any big storms in the last 20 years?
Definitely. We had, I'm trying to think, I think it was back in the winter of like 2010. There were two really bad snowstorms that caused a lot of power outages around us. And then Hurricane Irene, I can't remember what year that was. I think it might have been the next year, 2011. That caused a lot of trees to fall down around us. During that time, I think we had no power for like 1 to 2 weeks. And then seemed like right after that, the next year, like maybe 2012 was when Hurricane Sandy came through. Of course, that was the really big one in our area. And that caused power outages for like 2 to 3 weeks in a row.
Okay. Also, what do you miss most about living here 20 years ago?
I guess what I'd say is, when we first moved in, what I mostly miss is probably the amount of snow that we used to get. We used to fall in the winter months. And the trees, when I mentioned to you about the colors in the fall, so the vibrant colors of the foliage and the leaves during the fall time.
All right. And what do you like most about living here now?
I getting back to the Schofield Town Park, I really like how that's been fixed and what it looks like now. We're able to take walks there now, and I also don't have to worry about the issue we had for a few years concerning the toxins that were possibly coming out of the park.
Okay. Concerning the Schofield Town Park, can you tell me more about the issues that sparked the cleanup of the park?
Sure. I remember back then that I think it was the EPA. They were testing soil samples from the Schofield Town Park, and they found that there were some harmful chemicals and toxins that actually made it unsafe for people to be there in the park. And around the same time, local residents that live near the park started to complain of water tests of their drinking wells that showed unsafe levels of chemicals and toxins in their water.
Okay. Well, why was the EPA testing there in the first place?
Well, we didn't know when we moved into our house that the Schofield Town Park actually used to be a landfill. It was a dump. And from what I understand, industrial companies from the city of Stamford and other businesses years ago would bring all of their waste materials up into this location because it was all woods and dispose of them right before there were any houses here. And so as a result of that, the EPA knew about that. They knew that it was a landfill, so they would come up periodically and test the soil in the park to make sure that it was safe, because they were aware that the park was basically created by just piling a bunch of dirt over on top of the old dump that used to be there.
Okay. And also, what do you mean by the toxins that were coming from the dump?
So, environmentalists at the time were concerned about something they called this toxic brew, which was made up of all of the different chemicals that had been dumped over all those years in the landfill. I don't recall what was found in the soil, except that the water, the groundwater that was leaching up to the surface, would kind of surface with some of the chemicals that were down in the dump. And this made the park unsafe for people to be there. And then the toxins that were found in people's drinking water, their well water in the area, were from chemicals that had been banned for use in the public for decades. So, decades before they found them in the drinking water. So it'd been a long time since they had been, dumped somewhere.
Okay. Can you think of any examples of the effects of the toxins and what made people believe this?
Well, it was, it was understood by many people, I guess, from, science. And, we learned as residents that the toxins that they were finding could cause cancer in people and possibly birth defects. Some of our neighbors began to walk around the edges of the park and found water that was kind of seeping from the park that kind of had this metal, like metallic shine or sheen to it. And you could also notice sometimes that there were some strong smells that came from like the water and the land around the park. And as people, as residents started to hear about, more and more what was going on, and as it was reported more and more in the newspapers, people who lived here started to wonder if, kind of local cases of cancer and different skin conditions that people had. So, things like eczema and rosacea and things like that, they wondered if they might have been caused by water from their wells that might have been contaminated by things that were in the dump.
Can you also explain what the city did to fix these problems?
Sure. So what I remember is that the Board of Representatives for the city, they started to discuss different ways that they might be able to fix the problems in the dump. And I remember what they did is they hired some consultants to really kind of study the situation and all the problems that we were having there and to try to come up with different solutions. And ultimately what the Board of Representatives decided to do was basically a multi-million-dollar project to cap the landfill professionally with this membrane that was waterproof that would prevent rainwater from leaching down into the waste. And what that would do, the theory is that it would keep the toxins that were in the dump from potentially seeping into the underground aquifer, the water under the ground, and therefore contaminate the residents' drinking well. So it would prevent that from happening. And then what the plan was is that on top of that waterproof membrane, they would then put in fresh topsoil and plantings to make the whole area look a lot nicer.
Okay. So what do you think of the park's current condition compared to how it used to be?
Oh, it's beautiful now. The park's current condition is so much better than it was before they had, did that professional capping of the dump. The area looks so much nicer. There's no longer any odor that comes from the park. It's much nicer.
All right. And can you think of any things that you like or dislike about the park now?
Yeah, so the things that I like is it really looks like a beautiful and natural piece of land, the way that they did it. They've installed a really nice walking path and trail around the park. They've also put in a couple of tennis courts for local residents to use. They took that old road salt building that was there. It was very old and aged, and they put a brand new structure in that looks like a barn, which is really nice looking. It's a much more pleasant area to look at, and it's something that all of us who live here can really use now as residents. And although you asked me about things that I miss or dislike, is that although the current condition of the park is so much better than it was, I really miss being able to bring our recyclables from the house there when they used it as a recycling center. Because now I have to go downtown, which is a lot farther drive to return what I have, or to go to the grocery store to return bottles and cans. But more importantly, I still have some concerns that they never removed all the toxins and the chemicals that were in the dump, because all they really did was cover over those wastes.
So I'm a little confused about why you're still worried about the toxins. So would you mind explaining that?
Yeah, sure. No problem. So, kind of like I said before, the city decided in the end to just cover over the area, which to me means there's a possibility that not all of the toxins were fully removed. The alternative, in fact, I know they weren't fully removed, because one of the alternatives to covering the area was to actually take trucks and to dig all of that waste out before returning the park, and the land there to its natural state, which I believe might have been, kind of a more thorough method, maybe safer.
That's very interesting. Thank you for taking the time to do this interview with me and explain the area of Schofield Town Park.
Oh, you're very welcome.